one of the things in the last several years that's becoming more and more obvious is tippet has gotten incredibly strong over the last decade, and hooks have stayed about the same, and maybe have even gone the other way on some of the cheaper brands. So, if you don't have a relatively stout hook, it's really easy to straighten out small hooks. So I tend to tie anything I can, or anything that's reasonable on that 100 SP, just because it's a little bit stouter hook and holds up to the stronger tippet that we have now.
That was Charlie Craven providing a great tip on choosing the right hook for fly tying. This is the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, episode 125.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today. We'll help you on your fly fishing journey with classic stories covering steelhead fishing, fly tying, and much more.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Thanks for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show today. We're heading to La Pescadora this year for a huge saltwater trip with myself and a few of the Wet Fly Swing community. If you are interested in a big saltwater trip for the Big Four, go to wetflyswing.com/Mexico, and I'll follow up with you on some details as we get closer. In today's episode, I talk with Charlie Craven, the founder of Charlie's Fly Box and a fly tying guru. Love that word, guru. Guru, it sounds good. We get into some tips on spinning and flaring deer hair today, why he loves buyouts for bodies, and a new way to tie the post on a parachute. Don't miss this one as Charlie talks about creating an original pattern and why flies like the morning wood special have made such a splash. So, without further ado, here's Charlie Craven. How's it going, Charlie?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. Yeah, thanks for coming on. We had a little bit of technical difficulties there getting going, but that happens occasionally. And the good thing is we have you on here. We're going to dig into some fly tying. I've got some questions here from folks out in the Facebook group and stuff. But, before we dig into everything, you have going there, maybe you could just talk about how you first got into fly fishing and tying.
Oh boy. It was a long time ago. I'm almost 50 now. So about 42 years ago, I got a fly tying kit for my 8th birthday. After a summertime fishing trip. My family has always fished and hunted, and we had gone on a summertime fishing trip, and I remember I had lost all of my dad's lures. And my dad said on the way home, if you learn to tie your own flies, you could make your own lures, and I had no idea what that meant, and my dad didn't do it. I had never seen anybody do it. I didn't know anything about it, but it sounded interesting. I've always been into fishing. So I got a fly tying kit for my 8th birthday, and that's sort of where it all started.
Nice. And where were you at when you started, when you were 8? Here in
Colorado.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you're in Colorado. That's right. Yeah. And what part of Colorado?
I grew up in Northland, just north of Denver. I don't actually remember where that trip was. Somewhere on the western slope, if I remember right. But that was so long ago. It's long gone.
Gotcha. And now your fly shop. So I guess I think you recently had a big move, right, to a new shop.
We did.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that and maybe just talk about what your shop's like from somebody who hasn't been there before?
Sure. Well, we were up in Old Town Arvada, which is sort of the original Arvada neighborhood. So it's sort of a boutique-y little center. And honestly, we just sort of outgrew the space and outgrew the area. There's no parking and all that. So, at the last minute before our lease was about to end up there, and I was about to sign a new one, I found a much bigger place less than a mile away. So we've got a new spot that's about 4,800 square feet. It's gigantic. It's got, we've got a big classroom, tons of floor space. We've got room to grow and expand. We've got a parking lot now. We're all really excited about it. We closed for about 7 weeks doing the remodel and kind of putting the new place together, and really, I couldn't be happier with it. I think it's better in every way. So we're pretty excited about where it's going.
Yeah. So it's a lot bigger than the old place.
Oh, much, much bigger. Yeah.
Yep. I was looking at some photos online. I haven't been there, but it looks like you've kind of got it looks clean. I mean, it's kind of a reddish theme almost. It kind of reminds me looking at kind of like Sims for some reason that comes to my mind. Do you guys cover, you have a little bit of everything in there?
We do. The shop is orange and gray on the inside. And, a lot of people who ask me that, and we do carry Sims, and always love Sims stuff. But I just liked orange.
I wanted
good. The old shop was kind of a tan and green color, and I wanted something different than that entirely. And orange and gray was where we went.
Yeah. No, it looks good. Okay, and you do classes there. What do you focus on during the week? What is most of your time spent doing? Do you do a lot of custom orders?
Yeah. I mean, I spend a lot of my day doing orders. Everybody thinks owning a fly shop is, like the dream job, but it's a job like anything else. I spent most of today writing orders for fly tying stuff. I do a lot of QuickBooks, more than I ever anticipated and more than I'd ever liked. That's the worst part of it. But it's managing a business. There's, I don't get paid to sit and tie flies all day, anymore anyway, but, it's something I enjoy. I can't imagine doing anything else. So,
yeah. And how did you first start? You mentioned when you were 8. When did, from that point to when you first had an idea of having a shop, how did that come to be?
Well, as I grew up, I became a commercial tyer fairly young. I think when I was about 12 years old. So I tied flies for shops and most of the shops around the Denver area, really. And so I kind of grew up around fly shops. And then I became a guide as I, became old enough, around 18. And I guided for several years in there. And trying to think what year it was, maybe like 2004. No, 2004 is when I opened this shop. So like 1998, I got a job offer to open and run a shop up in Boulder. That's Rocky Mountain Anglers. And so I took that job offer and kind of got in on the ground floor there to kind of figure out how to open a shop. And I stayed there for about 5 years. And in 2004, it was time to just do it myself. And that's where we opened the original place.
There you go. So you just opened it up in 2004. And what was that like? Can you take us to that first year? I can't remember. 2004 was a little bit ago.
It's scary for sure, opening a business. And like I said, I've done it a lot. I've worked in a lot of fly shops. I've been in the industry, essentially my whole life. I've had one job outside the fly fishing industry my whole life. So, it's still even having that basis, it's a scary thing to do for sure. You just don't know if it's going to go and, how things are going to go. And hindsight, 15 years later, hindsight is 2020. It went wonderfully right from the get go. And, I kind of went through the same thing with this move. You always wonder if things are going to work out as well as you hope. And, I can say right now it's better than I ever hoped, even with the move. So, I can't imagine it's a whole lot different than any other business. It's, doesn't matter how much there's always some uncertainty.
Yeah. No, it's cool. I was chatting recently to Bruce Chard, who was talking about, we were talking a little bit about IFTD and how it moved from, when it was over in Florida and moved out to Denver. And he was just talking about how Denver is just this, hotspot. I think most people know it, lots of shops, lots of people. Do you see it as, do you see a lot of competition? How does that feel? You have a shop, obviously you've been around a while, but do you see new shops popping up here and there in Denver?
Not so much these days. Just as of late in the last 5 or 6 years, I don't really see many new shops popping up. There's every now and again there's a new one here and there, but there's sort of an established cabal of fly shops in Denver and pretty well geographically spread out. So everybody's got their own kind of little territory. We don't really infringe on each other, and we all generally get along pretty well too. Mm-hmm. There's Charlton Anglers all and Front Range up in Boulder and Rocky Mountain up in Boulder and St. Pete's up in Fort Collins. There's a lot of really good fly shops around, but they're not right on top of each other so much. So, we don't, certainly we all compete with each other, but, it's not a cutthroat thing by any means. A lot of times we'll trade products back and forth if one guy needs this or that. And,
yep.
It's a pretty easygoing group for sure.
Okay. Cool. Well, and on your flies, I was just kind of looking at your website a little bit, looking at some of the flies, and you had different names of tyers who invented them and things like that. How does that work when the stuff you tie? I guess you take special orders, but the flies you have in your shop, are those mostly flies, some you've developed, some others have developed, or how do you, how does, I'm trying to get a picture of how that all works. What flies do you carry, or do you just have everything?
Oh, we've got a little bit of everything for sure. I actually just about half an hour ago ordered another fly bin. We've got 7 fly bins with 400 bins in each one. So we've got a mountain of different flies, and they're not all mine by any stretch. I'm pretty discerning when it comes to fly patterns, so I am picky about what we put in. But basically the way the program works, I think what you're asking about is like signature ties.
Yeah, exactly.
The signature flies from signature tyers.
Yeah.
I'm a signature tyer with Umpqua, and so when I develop a pattern, I'll submit it to Umpqua, and if they like it, they'll produce the fly commercially, and they'll be sold in all the fly shops, all over the world. So I get a royalty on all those flies, but I don't have to actually tie them all. So it's a lot like writing a book or writing a song, anything like that. You get a royalty from the pattern.
Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. And I guess I was just kind of thinking I've been out of the loop a little bit on the the shops and stuff. So, and I was talking to Rainey Riding a little while back, and she was talking about how she has a bunch of foam fly, obviously a bunch of patterns of her own. And I noticed I opened up some, I think it was Big Y Fly or some shop, I can't remember which one it was, and they were selling, I think one of her foam flies for 70 cents. And I was asking her, and I was kind of asking if that's okay. And and that was the question I was trying to get an answer for. And she thought it wasn't quite, because since it was her fly, but I guess it depends on, whose fly, or how does that all work?
Well, frankly, there's not really a way to patent a fly.
Okay.
So the flies aren't patented. The names are trademarked. So, Craven's 2-bit hooker is a trademark name. So the 2-bit hooker part of it is trademarked.
Well, and if it's trademark, what does that mean for the fly? Somebody can't.
That means another supplier can't use that same name.
Okay, there you go.
It doesn't mean they can't. So it is legal to rip off somebody's flies, and there's tons of places that do it, and it's a point of contention for me. I put a lot into these designs and developments, and without going too far out here, it frankly pisses me off when I see other manufacturers steal fly patterns of mine. Or of anybody's, really. I mean, it's just plagiarism. There's no two ways about it. Yep,
gotcha. So that's it. So basically, yeah, if your pattern winds up and somebody's selling it online and you didn't give them permission, that's just not, that's basically.
Well, they have to buy it from Umpqua for it to be my pattern.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thanks for
clarifying. That's not even about the money. The fly game can be about money, certainly. As you get bigger and have more patterns, it's certainly worth doing. But it's just do your own work.
Yep. And do you think a majority of that, I mean, obviously we have kind of an overseas, a lot of flies coming. Do you think it's more kind of that overseas thing, or is it just a mix of a lot of stuff in this country as well?
It's a mix of a lot of stuff. Most of the commercially made flies are made overseas. But there's a lot of young guys, out on the internet these days that are, starting their own little fly company in their basement, that do the same kind of thing. And it goes for them as well. Everybody's, the market exists for those flies because I developed a fly, or Rainey developed a fly that become popular and works and holds together and does all the things it's supposed to do. And then somebody comes along and copies it and puts their name on it, or even puts it, leaves your name on it. But
exactly,
you're not getting the credit or the money or the impetus for any of it. So, I don't view that as legit at all. And it's something when I develop a fly, if it starts to go too close to something else that's already out there, I really, usually just abandon it.
That's right. How would somebody know if they're tying a fly? I mean, I guess you wouldn't know, right? You could tie a brand new fly you just created, but it seems like all flies or a lot of them come from, right? You're using a fly pattern, all of a sudden you're like, you change it up a little bit. At what point does it differentiate? Sure. Is it different enough that it could become its own fly?
One of the things that I look for when I come up with a new fly is I always want my new fly to do whatever it is it's supposed to do better than what came before it. And that's sort of my byline on any new flies. It's got to do something better. It's got to be an improvement over what already exists. So it's got to float better. It's got to be more durable. It's got to be easier to tie. It's got to be, any combination of those things. It's got to be some sort of an improvement over what's already out there. A variation where you use pheasant tail for the tail instead of hen back fibers. That's just because you didn't have the material. So substituting and making a little change to an existing pattern is not at all creating a new pattern. Changing a couple colors here and there is not at all creating a new pattern. Making a new use for it, making it sink better or float better, swim better, cast better, any of those things, an improvement over what exists, I think, is what makes the difference. Okay, cool. Thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, so you have some classes, I think, at your shop. Do you? You do some intro. Can you talk a little bit about your fly tying classes? What you do there? Sure. Yeah. Generally, the class that I do most often is a basic beginning fly tying class, and it goes along with my basic fly tying book, which actually came from the class. Over years of teaching it. So the class that I teach most often is that basic class, and it's a 1 night a week for 6-week class, a couple hours a night here at the shop. And pretty comprehensive. We start off with brassies and black beauties, and we end up with royal wulfs and humpies. So it's a lot of hours of tying, and the way the class is built, you add on to the techniques that you learn each week, so that by the time you get to the hard flies at the end of the class, they end up being the easiest because you've done all those steps before. I say all the time, the brassie's the hardest fly we'll do in the class because at that point you've likely never tied before. So there's a lot of brand new stuff on that. But even, the second, third, fourth fly, you've done some of that stuff before. So you build this toolbox of techniques that you keep adding to. And that's really what fly tying is just collecting those techniques. And as you master them, you get better and better. And it just, can go on forever, certainly. But there's a, basic set of skills that you can pick up in a good beginning fly tying class that'll carry you a long way.
Okay, cool. And for somebody new, if they can't get into a class, and I mean, I guess there's lots of YouTube videos. Any other places you would point them to, pick it up if they're just starting out?
Well, there's as I've taught classes over the years for 30 years now, people learn different ways for sure. I've always done like online tutorials and step-by-step tutorials, and and my books. That are step-by-step photos and directions. And then some people like, a video where you actually see it happening. So we started doing more of that. There's a lot of good stuff out there. I will caution, YouTube's got, probably less really good stuff than it does really bad stuff. So you have to sort of temper your scope as you look through some of that stuff. There could be a guy that, learned to tie a fly last week and has now got a video on it. So,
Yeah.
You have to be a little careful with that, but there is some really good stuff out there for sure.
Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe we can just jump into a few, some tips and questions. I was hoping maybe we could touch a little bit on saltwater flies and as we get into it. But I get questions in kind of the Facebook group, and one of them, I guess, maybe we just start off with, this isn't necessarily saltwater flies, but tying tiny flies. Do you have any tips? I mean, do you tie a lot of, what's the smallest stuff you tie?
Oh boy, yeah. I live in Colorado, so we're like the tiny fly capital of the world. So I mean, there's lots of little tiny stuff.
Yeah.
An average fly in Colorado, it's kind of a standard issue fly is a size 20.
Oh wow.
It's not to say that you can't fish bigger stuff, but we sell an awful lot of size 20 flies. For the most part, that little stuff, the biggest thing is to just make every wrap count. If it takes 2 wraps to tie the tail in, don't use 4. You just have to be, very diligent about how much material you're putting on it, way less dubbing than you anticipate. Just scaling everything down. I make a game in the first class of, I tell everybody to see how little dubbing they can get away with. And, it's amazing how little it takes. Years ago, I remember I had a giant order of RS2s, and, I tied 700 dozen size 20 RS2s with a package of dubbing. So that tells you how little material needs to go on a small fly. It's just, everything's much smaller scale than the layman particularly, but even tyers that have tied for a while, generally if they have trouble with small flies, it's almost always they're using too much material.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. And if somebody's coming into your class, I guess they walk in, do you have kind of a set number of people typically or just does it vary each week or each session?
Historically, I've always done 6 in a class. In this new shop, we've actually got a big classroom. We've got about a 700 square foot classroom. So my class size will go up a little bit here in the new space just because we've got a little bit more room, but it's probably only going to go to 10. It's still just me teaching the class. So, it's not like I could do a very good job of it with 50 people, but, with a little more room, I could handle a few more people, but, typically 6 to 10 in a class is about right.
Okay. And when they walk up to the table, I guess do you have vices that you recommend, or do you, if somebody was getting started, what would they start with? What I generally tell people is buy if you're into it, and typically these are guys that have been coming in buying flies all summer. Yep. And,
in the fall or winter, they decide they want to learn to tie it. I say, you're into fly fishing, you're going to do it. You're not, this isn't a question thing if you're going to like it. No. Buy the best stuff you can right off the bat, and you'll buy it one time. Which, is true of all tools. If you're going to use them and get into it, you're never going to regret buying a good vise and good scissors and good wood finisher. You're never going to regret good tools. The flip side of that is there's a lot of really cheap stuff out there that makes the job a lot harder. There's, no two ways about it. Invariably the classes we start after Christmas, somebody got a cheap, $35 fly tying kit, whole set of tools. And it's hard to tie good flies with a cruddy set of tools. You're fighting with the vise, the scissors are clunky. There's definitely a degree of quality to the tools. And what you can turn out with them. I can't tie good flies with bad tools either, and I've done it a lot. So, typically I'll tell them, get the best tools you can afford. And to get started, it's a pretty basic set. A vise, a scissors, a bobbin, and a whip finisher are all you need to get out of the gate. There'll be other tools that you add as you go along, but that'll get you out of the gate. So it's not like you need every tool the day you start.
Yep. Yep, definitely. And what do you like to use? Do you use different company as far as the vise? What do you typically go with?
I've used a Dynaking Pro vise for. I got it when I got out of high school. I think I bought it when I was 19. So about, was that 30 years ago? Nice. Yeah, 30 years ago.
I know, it
I
goes
still
fast.
tie flies on that same vise every day.
Exactly. Yeah, it goes fast. Here's another question this is from Chris Kerr in the Facebook group. And I don't even know if this is, I'm assuming this is a him. He had a question about spinning deer hair. And it was funny because I was talking to, RU Superfly. We were chatting there. I had a previous podcast episode and we were mentioning about spinning deer hair, because that's how I used to do it. Do you typically spin deer hair, or how do you how does that process look?
It depends on the fly. If it's going to be like a hair butt kind of thing, no, I'll typically stack it. Flare it in place and stack the bunches. You can just without moving the thread forward or back on the hook, you can fit a lot more hair onto the hook and thereby trim it a lot tighter. And a lot cleaner when you're all said and done by flaring than you can by spinning. Spun hair heads I will typically do on something that I want a fairly loose head. Typically a sinking fly, or saltwater fly is a good example of that. A bonefish slide or something like that. You don't want a really tightly packed head on something like that. So spinning hair is going to put relatively a small amount of hair on the hook in the same amount of space as what you would do with stacking or flaring hair. For a hair bug, I would definitely flare it. That's a better way to do it, I think. Okay.
And would you have if you were going to spin the hair, are there any tips to doing it, or, if you're trying to do it right?
It's a hard thing to explain in words, but
yeah.
If you're trying to get a tightly packed head, and spin the hair, the biggest thing I'd say people do is if you're trying to get it tightly packed, you use a much bigger clump of hair than you think. And that's true on both spinning and on flaring or stacking hair. On a big bug, and I'm sure you've seen some of Pat's videos.
Yeah.
That chunk of hair is bigger around than your thumb. On some of the big stuff, it's as big a chunk of hair as I can hold in my hand.
Wow.
As I can comfortably manage to get tied to the hook. So on a big fly, you want to get as much in there as you can. For spinning hair, it's sort of finding that balance of enough to get the hook covered without making the fly extra dense or extra buoyant if it's not meant to be.
Yep. Okay, cool. So yeah, taking it back to the table. So, I'm a new person coming up for that class, and I've got everything sitting down, and you pull out the hooks. I guess the first thing, what is it? Can you just walk through those steps? Somebody sits there. What is the first thing you do for that new fly tie? If somebody's listening to this and they're brand new.
The first thing I do is I go over the parts of the hook, just so you're kind of familiar with where the hooks start. The hook eye, the index point, which is an eye length behind the hook eye, where the hook bend is, what the gap is, and how all those things relate. Once you kind of understand that, I think people in general with fly tying hooks are pretty confused by them. But I'll explain how the hooks work and how the sizing works. A size 14 hook is not based on the length of the hook shank at all. It's based on the gap of the hook, the width of the gap. So a size 14 nymph hook and a size 14 dry fly hook in this nebulous standard version that doesn't really exist would have the same size hook gap. But either one could be extra long or extra short. Could have a curve shank. There's a lot of variables that go to it, but the gap should be relatively consistent. Now, that being said, it's not really, because there's so many different brands and they don't all work from the same baseline. So,
yep.
But that's generally where I start, was the parts of the hook and kind of covering the what to look for in different tools.
Okay, cool. And so you have, in the hooks you use, I guess you've probably got all sorts of different hooks, but do you have a brand you use commonly for those classes?
Yeah, I use mostly Tiemco hooks. I do use some Daiichi hooks. But mostly Tiemco hooks. That's been the best hook I found by a long shot. Okay,
and you mentioned what was the first fly you typically start them out with?
A brassy.
Oh yeah, so brassy. So what would be would be the Tiemco or the hook you'd use for that fly?
The hook I use for a brassy is a Tiemco 100 SPBL, which is a dry fly hook technically, but it's a 1.5 heavy wire. So it's a little stouter, and the thing I like about it is that it is a little stouter. That's one of the things in the last several years that's becoming more and more obvious is tippet has gotten incredibly strong over the last decade, and hooks have stayed about the same, and maybe have even gone the other way on some of the cheaper brands. So, if you don't have a relatively stout hook, it's really easy to straighten out small hooks. So I tend to tie anything I can, or anything that's reasonable on that 100 SP, just because it's a little bit stouter hook and holds up to the stronger tippet that we have now. There's so many, kind of cheap import, Chinese hooks out there these days that, if you tie 4X tippet to them, you're going to straighten the hook out. And that's just, in my opinion, a complete waste of time.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you spend all the time tying it. You might as well spend a little more.
Tying the fly, and you can't fish. Yeah, you straighten two of them out, and you don't ever want to tie another one on.
Exactly. Okay, so yeah, and the brassy is just your standard. I mean, basically just some copper wire or whatever you use there. Is that pretty much? I mean, when you teach them that fly, is that just basic?
Copper wire and a little dubbing. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, very simple. It teaches you to attach materials to the hook, make concentric wraps and get those wire wraps butted together tightly.
Mm-hmm.
A little kind of precursor to dubbing as we start to work into, flies later in the class, the RS2 and Harriers that use more dubbing, but, a relatively small area. And we typically start on a size 18 hook. Again, just to kind of keep you on the small side. It's much easier to move from small to big as you learn to tie than it is to, start big and work your way down. I think that just teaches bad habits and gives you way too much room for error to start with, and it's much harder to scale down.
There you go. That's a great tip. So basically, yeah, you start small. I mean, 18 is fairly small, and
18 is fairly small. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's great. And that way, once they nail that, then a 16 or 14, anything below that is pretty easy to handle.
Absolutely, you got plenty of room to do the stuff as you get onto bigger flies.
Gotcha. And then in those intro classes, do you do? And how small do you go then on flies?
Typically 18 is about as small as we do in the class, just so that everybody can see it. I always try to do the flies in the class in reasonable sizes that you can fish also. So, I probably fish more size 20 brassies, but a size 18 is still reasonable.
Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Yeah, I just wanted to get a feel for, your class, and it's kind of interesting. And you mentioned the book. So can you remind me again that you have an intro book for somebody if they want to check it out?
Yeah, it's called Charlie Craven's Basic Fly Tying. It's been out, it might be out 10 years now. And they just reprinted it again. I think it's actually not available right this minute, but it's coming back in print again. They tell you it's out of print, which sounds like it's gone forever. It's just between printings.
Oh, okay.
So they're printing a new batch now, and they should be out again in April. But that book came from my notes that I took over 10 years of teaching fly tying class. I always kind of kept notes and copied notes so that the students could have, a set of notes that was already done, so they didn't have to sit and write everything down instead of watching the process. And that evolved, over time into a full-on book that's, 275 pages. It's a pretty comprehensive fly tying book, and honestly, probably the best one I've written yet. So
amazing. Yeah, no, I've had, and I'll put a link in the show notes to that book when it's back out or whatever. But yeah, I've had a number of people that have mentioned that book. I think they've said that that's for sure. If you're getting started, that's a great resource. So I'll definitely link out to that. Okay,
right on.
Yeah. So yeah, I get I think a good feel for getting started. And then you also have other upper level classes you do if people want to take it to the next level.
I do a few, intermediate or kind of specialty classes. I get asked about tying streamers a lot. So every now and again, I'll do a streamer class. Sometimes I'll get, our beginning class is so comprehensive. Honestly, if you take the beginning class, you've got most of what you need for trout fishing. So I'll have people ask me about doing a dry fly only class or something like that. But those are typically people that took someone else's beginning class that was just nymphs, just basic nymphs. So they're looking for the other half of our beginning class. But I will do, occasionally saltwater or streamer classes to kind of fill in. When I have a group big enough to fill a class, I'll certainly do those. Gotcha. And I also saw out there you had a fly tying contest. I think this might have been last November. Is that something you do regularly? We did. Yeah. That's something we're just kind of starting back into. A friend of mine, Jason, has been sort of spearheading that effort, and it was actually a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to he set the contest up to pick a fly out of the basic fly tying book, and everybody tied it and kind of picked the best one. So that is something we'll do more of for sure. It's just keeps people tying, and that's what makes you better tyers. The more you tie, the better you get. Yeah, definitely. And in those in that book, with your notes, the 270 pages. I mean, obviously there must be a lot of good tips in there. Is there anything that just commonly comes out that you would give somebody if you want to say like a top 10 list of tips that are, that might help somebody that's new to it, or what do you think of when somebody asks you, what are the best tips for fly tying? Does anything come to mind? I'd say, use a half or a third the amount of dubbing that you think you should use. And then on the next fly, use half that amount. There's really no limit to how, especially on a small fly, to how sparse you can get away with dubbing. Make every wrap a thread count. Don't make 3 wraps if 2 will do it. Don't make 2 if 1 will do it. Again, especially on small flies, make sure all your thread wraps are tight.
What is tight?
Oh boy,
what does tight mean?
You should be wrapping the thread tight enough to deflect the hook. The hook should flex a bit as you wrap.
Oh, okay.
I see a lot of flies that are tied fairly loosely. Especially like import flies. I see that very commonly, or beginner tyers that just don't have their bobbin tight enough, or don't know how to control the thread as well. So the fly's just not tied tightly, and there's just no hope of it holding together. And that's, flies don't have to be pretty. I am a pretty fly guy for sure. But they don't have to be pretty to catch fish, but they do have to hold together. So that's the most important thing, is they've got to be durable.
Gotcha. What do you think is the most popular, if you had to pick one, fly pattern, say dry fly that you sell? Is there one that just sticks out?
Parachute Adams.
Oh, yeah. It is.
So,
parachute.
It astounds me how many Parachute Adams we sell. And that being said, I fish Parachute Adams all summer long too. It's a great fly. It's just a generic bug, but it honestly, every year we get so many of them in, and I always look at them and I'm like, oh my God, we've got 1 million of them, and we go through them. That is by a long shot the most popular dry fly.
Yeah, I love the parachute. It's it takes a little skill too. Do you have any tip? Maybe think about tying the parachute. Could you talk a little about tying that fly and where people struggle with that one? Is that one you do in your class?
All right, we do a parachute. We just do a parachute bluing olive, but
right.
The technique is the same. The pattern color changes a little bit, and the only reason for that is we do a conventional Adams as well. So just kind of mixing it up, we just do a bluing olive parachute, but it's tied the same. And there's a few newish. I say new, new 15 years ago now, but kind of new ways to tie parachutes versus what I learned when I was a kid. There's a lot of stuff that you can tie the hackle feather to the post and wrap it down the post rather than wrapping up and down. That makes a much cleaner hackle collar. I tie a lot of my Parachute Adams with biot bodies just because the biots don't soak up fish slime like a conventional dub body does. So the fly's lower maintenance. You don't have to clean it and dry it quite so often. There's a lot of little tricks. I've got a couple. There's a video on our website of a Parachute Adams with a biot body.
Oh, cool.
But that's one of my very favorite flies to tie. I'm big into parachutes for sure.
Perfect. I'll link out to that video as well. And do you have a ton of videos out there and stuff you've tied?
There's a bunch of them on our website. I'm not sure how many are there. There might be, there might be 20 of them on there now. And there's, I've got probably 50 of them filmed that we're just sort of doling out as we go through. So there's always more coming for sure.
Okay. Had another question here. This was from Chad Kennedy. He was asking about what new materials are you most excited about? Anything? Do you see a lot of new materials coming through?
It depends on what you can. I've been in this game a long time, so there's not a whole lot of truly new stuff. There's these new Polish quills, which is a stripped and dyed peacock quill. That's been around. That's what Quill Warden's tied with. It's 100 years old, but now they've dyed the quills, and they're beautiful. There's no arguing with it, but they're not new.
Yeah.
Possum fur is sort of my new material that I've been playing with. It's just American possum cut in zonker strips. Possum's been around for 1 million years, but it's sort of a new fly tying material. It's been being dyed and used in a lot of different applications. So there's definitely some cool stuff coming through that's especially for the new crowd anyway, appears new. It maybe something old, but it's got a new little twist on it. And there's all kinds of things like that. There's very little that's brand new, but there's a lot of stuff that's being sort of represented that in many cases is better.
That's right. Yeah, I remember Kelly Gallup was on in a past episode, and he was talking about how he was breaking out some of the old streamers from 30 or 40 years ago. And,
absolutely.
And a lot of kids,
that's all brand new.
Yeah, exactly. They thought some of it was they didn't even realize they were old flies. They thought they were brand new because
absolutely
same stuff. Nice. Okay. Well, this is good. This gives us a little feel, and I guess just keeping on that line of the flies, another fly this is another kind of old traditional one, but the humpy. Do you guys still tie a lot of those patterns?
I do, man. You're
Yep.
Going right up my alley. That's my other favorite fly to tie.
Oh, cool.
That was the first, official fly pattern that I learned when I was a kid. And I did it horribly, and I've sort of developed a technique to do it a lot more consistently these days. But yeah, that's one of my favorite flies. I still fish that fly all summer. That and a parachute Adams together, I fish almost every day during the summer.
Oh, there you go.
So yeah, Humpy is an old fly that's sort of faded away for sure, but I wouldn't go fish during the summer without it. I still catch a lot of fish on that fly.
Yeah, it's a cool fly. I think it works for lakes too, and different sizes. That's a cool thing. I mean, when you think of the Humpy,
just general bug.
Yeah, just a general bug. Is that it's kind of like similar to a Adams parachute, right? Kind of a generalist.
Yeah, just generic fish food. I fish 14s and 16s. I fish them in orange and yellow and tan and black. Red is a hugely popular color, but I don't very often fish it in red. But I catch a lot of fish on that. Everywhere I go, I fished it on the South Fork this summer. It was like I was back in 1980 fishing a Humpy on the South Fork of the Snake, and fish ate it just as good now. So the fish aren't any smarter.
That's right. And it's the Humpy? Is that moose? Is that the hair on the back?
It's typically the way I tie it. I use moose hair for the tail.
For the tail, yeah.
And then for the hump and the wings, I use yearling elk, which is just much more manageable than moose hair.
And moose, that's right. Moose is kind of stiff and
a
little stiffer. Okay, so you have the elk, and then once you kind of do the little hump, then you drop it off, and then I guess you use the elk also to pull it up as your posts, right? You use that.
Well, that's where I vary a little bit. My method of doing it is I actually stack the hair and I do the wings first.
Oh, right.
And then I can take some of those butt ends out. I can cut those out so that I don't have quite so much of those thick butt ends to build the hump out of. So my wing height and placement is a lot more consistent with that method, with the improved method, than it was with the old method. So it's a lot easier to tie consistently with this new way than the old way. And I tied them the old way for years and years and years before I kind of thought to put the wings on first, and that's made all the difference for sure. It's a lot more consistent and much better end result, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That was always a struggle, right? Because you get your body built up, and all of a sudden you have a very little room to tie it. You've either got enough hair for the hump and way too much for the wings, or vice versa, and it's just really hard to get everything measured and planned ahead of time to where it's going to come out, especially on any kind of consistent basis. It's not to say it can't be done, but it's hard to do over and over. Gotcha. Okay, and then as far as keeping on the dry fly, are there any other common or dry flies you guys sell a lot of there? There are any new ones that are out there you're selling a lot of?
Mercer's.
Well, we were just Mike talking Mercer. About it. His what's it called?
He's got a bunch of great flies, but it's a little caddis pattern. I just put some up. I'm going to walk over here and look.
Yeah, check it out. Let me know. I'm thinking the one I'm thinking of is the one I've talked about before.
Missing link. That's what it is.
That's exactly. That's the story. I told that story.
Great fly.
That's it. Okay.
That's another just kind of general bug. It's sort of set up as a caddis pattern originally, but it's got some little spent wings underneath the elk hair wing and a little parachute hackle in there. It's just kind of a low floating emerger cripple catch-all bug. And he's done it in a bunch of colors and variations, for everything from mayflies to caddis to stoneflies. That's a pretty creative pattern as far as I'm concerned. I'm a big fan of that. We sell that one, especially as a new fly, we sell that one very well.
That is a good one. Oh, and I'll put a link to the video on that one too. And can you talk just briefly about that one, or what the fly, how you tie that one really quick? Or
that one is, it's a fairly simple body, just a thread body with a tinsel rib, or a flat crystal flash rib is what it's got.
Oh, right.
And then a little set of spent Xenon wings with some dubbing between them, and then an upright elk hair wing on top of that with a parachute around the bottom. So it's fairly complicated to tie, the first few times you do it, because there's a lot going on kind of in a little bit of space. But once you practice it a few times, and I mean, that's, typical of me as well. I've tied lots of flies, but any new fly, I have to certainly work through a bunch of them to kind of figure out the details and the little elements that you've got to watch for and kind of get everything in place. It's an intimidating fly to look at, but if you tied a dozen of them by the start of the second dozen, you'd probably have a lot better handle on it for sure.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, the missing link, definitely. And I guess staying on that, when I asked Mike was on in a past podcast we had here, and he mentioned that was one of his top flies. I mean, just staying on that track as far as your top two flies, have we already talked about them, or are there anything we're missing if you say a couple of maybe dry flies?
As far as sellers go, the mole fly, which is a little, mayfly major merger pattern that I've had for 20 some years. That we saw a pile of those. That's a super simple little CDC emerger. It's nothing to look at. It's super easy to tie, but man, if I, was fishing a hatch anywhere, anywhere, anytime, any kind of Baetis hatch or mayfly hatch, and during the winter, the small midge hatches, that fly is almost always tied to the end of my tippet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was, and I had that in my notes here. Denise Kendall wanted to ask you if you have any new versions of the mole fly coming out.
There's a mole midge. The original mole fly was just brown beaver dubbing and a natural CDC wing. And then, it took off hugely popular. And it was funny because that fly didn't even get accepted the first 3 or 4 times I submitted it. But then the word kind of spread about it. And, since then we've got a PMD version, an olive version, a gray version. And then there's a mole midge that's got that stripped peacock quill in dyed colors for the body. So a little skinnier body that hangs a little bit lower and tied in smaller sizes for a midge emerger. There are some variations on that for sure. It's, essentially the same fly, just color variations and size variations.
Okay, cool. And a couple more questions here. This is my, you have a fly shop, obviously a business, but we did have another question here. It was, it basically said going into fly shops and spending too much money. Do you have any tips for somebody who's maybe going in there to buy, they want to get started, or maybe they're started, but they see things as kind of spendy. What would you tell somebody?
Is this from a fly tying perspective, or the answer probably is the same either way?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah, just let's think fly tying.
I would. I started to say the answer would, on gear, rods, reels, waders, etc. It would really be about the same thing. Mm-hmm. I've never had a customer come in and buy good stuff and come back and complain.
Yep.
Excuse me. That being said, obviously we've all got a budget. I generally kind of stick to the rule: buy the best thing that you can afford. You'll be a lot happier with it than bottom rung stuff. Leaky waders, with a great warranty, do not make you dry and warm at the end of the day.
No.
So good products, are absolutely worth the money. And that's not from a fly shop owner perspective. That's, we just did this big remodel and I bought all kinds of tools, and there's a big difference between good ones and bad ones, expensive ones and cheap ones. They do the job better. They don't break. They, do what they're supposed to do. There's very little regret in buying good stuff. And you tend to own it for a lot longer. You can buy, a $150 pair of waders, 8 or 9 times in 10 years. You can buy a good pair of Sims waders once, for $500, and you'll have those for 10 years. So, really per day, it's cheaper to buy good stuff than it is to buy cheap stuff.
Yep. Yeah. And did you remodeled your shop? Did you do that yourself?
We had a contractor as well, but we did a lot of the work also.
Oh, nice.
Which was, a lot like manual labor, which is not what general fly shop labor is like. So, yeah, it about killed us, but we got through it.
Yeah, nice. All right, good. Well, anything else? I mean, I guess just thinking about, we've been staying on a general clip here. Obviously there's a zillion flies we could talk about. I did, tools wise, I guess you mentioned the basic tools. Any other tools that you would recommend that are above the basics that somebody should have if they want to kind of up their game?
As you grow as a fly tyer and kind of get into different stuff, you've got a vise, a scissors, a bobbin, a whip finisher, a hair stacker, a dubbing brush, and then as you really get into it, there's an endless supply of tools. There's this new Swiss CDC clip thing that we've been getting in that's used to put materials in a dubbing loop, a little more handily than your fingers, has been enormously popular lately. We've sold tons of them. And that's sort of an intermediate to advanced tool. But there's a lot of tools out there that, you don't necessarily need, but they do make the job easier. And as you get into fly tying, it's like anything else. As you get into anything, you start to, kind of be attracted to those little gadgets. And fly fishing is all about little gadgets.
Yes.
There's a tool for everything. And we kind of glom onto that just as the people we are. So, there's no end to it.
That's right. What is the, as far as, you have an online presence. Do you do a lot of, are you pushing that, trying to do a lot of online sales, or do you get most of your stuff coming through the shop there, through the door?
Most of our stuff is still through the front door. We've got a pretty big population. It's about 2 million here in Denver area. So, we've got a pretty good, through the door business, and always have. But in the last year, actually, we rebuilt our website, and we've got a very good online store, and it's growing by leaps and bounds. It astounds me every day. I come in and, there's a pile of orders waiting for us. So, it's just I say it adds a couple days to the week, from what you get coming through the front door, the online just adds to it. And so we are pursuing that for sure.
Yep. And do you carry a lot of books? Is that something you have in there?
We do. I've got 3 or 4 books myself, and then, and a lot of these guys are from Colorado. So we carry a lot of books here in the South. So, books are not as popular as they used to be. Certainly, the new day and age with everything on the internet. Mm-hmm. The thing I do prefer about, and I've said it for years, the thing I prefer about a book is that, the author has sort of been vetted, and, generally it's somebody that has proved that they know what they're talking about, writes a book. Where on the internet it's kind of, anybody that's got a modem and a connection can put up whatever they like. And, it's a double-edged sword. There's a lot of great information out there, but you really got to be able to filter it.
Yeah, you got to be careful with what you're watching. Okay, and I just noticed that, and I know we talk about books and resources here, and a lot of times I'd love to send a link out to the shops, but a lot of times it's hard to find these books, and Amazon tends to have a lot of, they have everything. So, are there any places?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like when you look to find books, like if you get this book you don't have, where do you go to find it?
Well, I own the shop, so I call my book supplier. But yeah, Amazon's got everything. It really does. I mean, in any way, shape, or form, that's, that pretty obvious answer on the book stuff. And I mean, you can find old books that are out of print. Sometimes you got to go to eBay for that kind of stuff, but it's all out there somewhere in the world. And that is one of the advantages to the internet, is you can get stuff that, you can find some old copy that somebody had laying around that you otherwise would not be able to find. So, Amazon is probably the best way to do that on a especially older book level, for sure.
I know that's kind of the struggle that, I think I struggle with, is that, they have everything, but at the same time, Amazon, they're known as they're putting out the small businesses, right? I mean, the way
there's 800-pound gorilla. Yeah, we're all, I own a small business right here, and I fight with it every day. Yep. And they are good at some things, and books, what you're getting. Some of the other stuff you got to touch, you got to see, you got to try it on.
Yeah. Yep. What about flight tying materials? Is that something you have to touch and try, kind of feel to make
I like
purchases?
to, yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons that our online fly tying stuff has gone so well, is we really do kind of high grade things for people. If you order, a piece of elk hair, you're not going to get a piece of junk, which is very easy to do. I don't really even allow it in the shop. We really high grade through everything. So very rarely do we, and honestly, if we don't have a good piece of whatever, you just won't get it. We're not going to send you garbage. So, having good materials, it's just like tools. If you don't have good materials, you can't tie good flies.
Yeah.
So good materials makes a huge difference. So, I do think it's something that you need to touch, or at least have the person that's getting for you know what they're looking for.
Right. Do you know? I mean, how do you know what junk is when you look at the deer or elk hair?
Broken tips. I've done this for a long time. So, I mean, I've and at various stages in my life. So, I mean, obviously, when I was a kid, I didn't have access to all the best material, and I've got to see where it works and where it doesn't. But broken tips or curled hair that's got bends in it or waves in it or is not straight. A nice, even, consistent tip length. Not a lot of underfur. There's a lot that goes into any variety of animal hair, whether, rabbit or deer or elk or moose or, any variety of critters, the quality of how it's processed and how it's dyed and how it's taken care of. That was one of the things in my basic fly tying book. When I had the book finished, I sent it off, and I had just a short little section, maybe a few paragraphs about selecting deer and elk hair. And my editor, Jay Nichols, I remember he called me back and he said, this is a pretty good start, but why don't you expand on that? And it wasn't something I really wanted to do because it was going to be so hard to sort of put into words what I look for in a piece of deer or elk hair. But I sat down and did it, and it's 3 or 4 page long section in the book about what I look for in deer and elk hair. And honestly, I think it's one of the best, most useful things I've ever written, because it kind of breaks down what I'm looking for, for each individual and what the difference between all those different kinds of hair are. Mm-hmm. So that's something that's easier to learn if you've got a little head start with something like that in front of you. But really, beyond that, it's, 10 years of trial and error, working with junk and working with good stuff and seeing the difference between the two.
Yeah, gotcha. Where do you get your materials from? A lot of different sources?
We do. Yeah. All our deer and elk and moose hair comes from Nature Spirit. They have, by a long shot, they're up in Cuskia, Idaho. by a long shot, the best hair that you can get. It's the best stuff I've ever seen, and very consistently. I can't remember the last time I got a piece of hair from them that wasn't up to snuff. But we do a ton with Hairline, ton with Wapsie, Nature Spirit, Umpqua. We buy a lot of our hooks and beads from Umpqua. There's an upper echelon of fly tying suppliers for sure, and that's where we kind of put our eggs in one basket, so to speak, just because we are consistently good.
Yeah, that's it. What do you think, when you look at yourself in the fly tying, what do you think you're best at? Is there anything that sticks out that you really, kind of, if you had to say you're best, or maybe something you really enjoy?
I'm good at, I'm good at problem solving. And I think that's why I've, kind of built so many patterns over the years is, I don't sit down to just make up a fly. Every fly that I've developed has got a reason for being. It was, solving a problem, whether, my swim coach streamer, I wanted a fly that wasn't so heavy to cast, but still had a big silhouette. So they all solve a problem. And I think that's what I am probably best at is, improving and solving problems of flies that either already exist or don't exist and should. A 2-bit hooker, I wanted a skinny little nymph that was extra heavy. So just solving that problem, something that, a lot of people don't like to fish with extra split shots. So that fly sort of does that for them. Makes you succeed in spite of yourself. If you don't want to fish a bigger dropper, there's a smaller fly that sinks better and is, plenty heavy, but it still sinks really well. That can kind of keep the fly down where it needs to be without putting any extra burden on the fisherman. So solving those problems, I think, is what I do particularly well.
That's right. And was the 2-bit hooker, was that your pattern?
It is. Yep.
That is. Okay, good. Yeah. Now you're ringing a bell. When I was talking to Kelly, I remember, I think your name came up because you got a couple of guys, we were talking about the funny porn names and stuff like that.
Oh yeah. Yep.
You're part of that, right? Because I think maybe I'll have to put a link in to that show to re-list it. But I think he was telling a story about, it was either you or somebody else who was just getting No, they were hammering Kelly because of all these porn names, right? And they're like, "What the hell is all this?"
Oh yeah.
But it turned out they were mostly your flies. It might not have been you. Who was that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
It probably was. When I wrote an article about the 2-bit when it first came out. Oh gosh, I don't even know how long ago this was, but I wrote an article in Fly Fisherman magazine. I do their Fly Tyers bench column, and I wrote an article about it. And somebody wrote in, saying that his 8-year-old or 7-year-old daughter asked what a 2-bit hooker was, and he apparently explained very graphically what that was. Which I think is bad parenting. There was an easy way to dodge that one. I've got plenty of kids myself.
Totally.
But, and that kind of started it. And all of this is, good-natured and tongue-in-cheek for sure.
Yeah.
The 2-bit hooker was actually called a Beanie May originally. And when I first came up with the fly, my best friend, Matt, his wife's name is Bean, and or her nickname is Bean. So he asked me if I'd name that fly the Beanie May after her, and I did. And so the fly was called a Beanie May for several years before I submitted it to Umpqua. And then when I sent it to Umpqua, they said, we love the fly, it's great, but you've got to come up with a different name. That name's not very good. So I went home and looked at the fly with the 2 beads and a hook, and I came up with 2-bit hooker. Totally, benign, not thinking anything about it being literal.
Yeah.
But there's not everybody's got the same sense of humor as me. So
yeah. I think it's pretty funny. Do you have any other names of kind of flies on that same line that are kind of out there?
Oh yeah. Last year before, there's I've got a stonefly hopper pattern called a Morningwood Special, which I've got a list of fly names that I just randomly come up with over the years. I've got a list in my phone that a lot of times I'll have a fly name just sort of in reserve for when I come up with a pattern. That's always the most fun and hardest thing to do is naming the flies. So I keep a list of, just kind of phrases and things that catch my ear. And the Morningwood Special had been in there for a long time. And then I finally came up with a stonefly pattern that was, the original version was similar to a Normwood Special.
Oh, right.
Which is a kind of, old-fashioned stonefly pattern.
Uh-huh.
And so Morningwood sort of fit along with it. And, I won't say there wasn't any fight in getting that name, accepted as the official name, but, people remember it for sure.
You got it done. Do you have any, I want to touch base on Normwood and maybe some other mentors in a sec, but any other names you haven't thrown out there you want to give us a little sneak peek, something maybe that's coming or a name that's kind of funny?
Let me think. The swim coach is a new streamer that should be available any minute now. Yeah, they were due this month. It's that fly was named after a guide friend of mine, Blake Clark, up in Cody, Wyoming, who dumped me out of his boat last year, and so I named the fly after him. He called it the swim coach because he kept yelling at me to swim. But most of them are named after. The Dirty Hippie is named after my wife. Since I met her, I called her Dirty Hippie. So
that's a good one.
They've all I've got a pretty good string of names. Dirty Hippie Problem Child is a new one, named after my youngest son, who's works really hard, gets a lot of work done, but can be a little bit of a handful for sure. There's I've got another one that's going to come out maybe next year, called a Fat Angie, which is named after my sister, who's not named Angie and is not fat. It's just sort of a long story that goes along with that. But yeah, she was happy about hearing that one.
Nice.
But a lot of it's sort of inside jokes. They all have a funny story that go along with them, and it makes doing demos and things like that fun because there's always Charlie's Calabaitis is pretty uncreative. When you get to kind of play with it a little bit, it makes them a lot more fun, and people do remember the names better that way.
Yeah, for sure. And do you have a book or plans in mind of having all these in a book somewhere so we won't forget all of them?
The second book I wrote is called Charlie's Flybox, and that's got a lot of my patterns in it.
Okay.
And that book is 7 or 8 years old now, so it doesn't have the newest stuff. And there may be another volume of that, as it comes. I've got a streamer book that'll come out in April. And then, maybe I'll work on, I think I have a dry fly book next on the agenda after that. But once I'm done with that, I may work on a second version of the Charlie's Fly Box just to kind of update it with the latest stuff.
Sure. And you mentioned, I guess Norm Wood is, maybe you could talk a little bit.
Norm, I don't actually know him. That's an old fly, and I want to say from like the 60s, maybe even earlier than that.
Yeah.
Kind of a calf tail, calf tail wing, orange body, sort of like a stimulator.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure it predates a stimulator even.
That's right.
But just kind of a big low floating stonefly pattern, like Montana pattern. And I don't know a lot about exactly where it came from, but it was a fly that I'd fished a fair bit. So. That name had always stuck in my head. I don't know exactly who Norm Wood is, but
that's what I mean. I think Norm Wood might be. Yeah, that's right. I believe it just rang a bell because I think he might be out from here in Oregon. I might be wrong, but
that actually does ring a bit of a bell to me. That you may be right.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, he's. I'm just looking up, searching. Norm Wood was a fly fishing guide on the Deschutes, right? So he was out here, and I think. Yeah, Norm Wood. Okay, I think I might know a little bit. So I'll put a little information. I'll search it up on. I always love doing a little history here. But you did mention Jay Nichols, and I looked at like Popovich and some of the other flies you had. Is there anybody out there that if you had to pick one or two people that really helped influence you or you think of as mentors along the way?
When I was a kid, I remember I mowed lawns for a month to save up $20 to buy a copy of Jack Dennis's. Volume, Basic Fly Tying Volume 1 or whatever the exact title was. So that was kind of the book that I had. But I'll be perfectly honest with you. I didn't know a lot of people that tied. I didn't run in the circles I run in now by any stretch. So I didn't really have an influence. I never had somebody that taught me to tie. I kind of figured it out the hard way. And, since I've kind of come up through the industry, there's certainly, Kelly Gallup's a spectacular tyer, great guy, just, flat out fun to be around. Rich Strolis is a guy from back East Connecticut. That's a great tyer. There's a lot of really good guys out there these days. Blaine Chocolate is super creative. Just, every time I see him, he's got, some new thing that just completely blows my mind, which is, not easy to do these days. There's a lot of, John Barr is, I'd say he's probably as much of a mentor to me. I met him, it might be 30 years ago now, when I worked at Front Range up in Boulder. Is when I first met him, and he was in the shop here just this last week. But he's certainly a mentor and an influence, probably on everybody in Colorado. And he's just he's not the best fly tyer I've ever met, but he is certainly the most creative and best problem solver of a fly tyer I've ever met. No doubt about that.
Cool. Yeah, you mentioned some names that some people I've talked to, and some people that are on my list I hope to get on for sure. That would be awesome. And yeah, we're going to start wrapping this up pretty quickly here, but I guess we can start off with just, you talked a little bit about flies and some tips and things. Could we, start off with the 222, which is your top 2 tips, top 2 flies, and top 2 resources? And, I think we've been talking a little about dry flies, so maybe we could think about, are there any other, maybe if you had to pick 2 flies, I guess you've already said them, right? Your top 2, any other flies you would throw out there as maybe you head onto the river and you start with?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I fish a Charlie Boy hopper and a 2-bit hooker. So I fish the hopper as the dry and the 2-bit as a dropper underneath it. I fish that an awful lot. I wouldn't go anywhere without those. The mole fly is always in my box. Parachute Adams and humpies are always in my box. Jujubatus was one of my, not one of my very first patterns, but shortly after I started, getting flies in the Umpqua catalog, Jujubatus is still probably my most popular fly. If you're on any tailwater, that's a hands down winner. I very rarely, these days fish, any existing patterns just because I kind of want to go out and, find the problem myself and solve it myself. So, I try not to, I try not to cheat off anybody else's work, I guess is there's certainly stuff that turns me on and that I think is super cool, but I try not to get too far into it just because I don't want to, one, impede on that tyer's work, and 2, I don't want it to influence mine. Yeah. Which is just a different way of looking at it for me. So.
Gotcha. Yeah. Do you want to pick one of those flies and maybe talk quickly about it and maybe think of some tips that come up as we're talking about? What was the first one you mentioned? The Charlie's.
Charlie Boy hopper?
Yeah, Charlie Boy hopper. When you think about tying that fly, are there any tips that you might describe as somebody's maybe watching the video that you could just, that you think of?
For sure. That was one of the very first 3 flies that I got into Umpqua were the Jujube Midge, the Charlie Boy hopper, and the Raging Craven, which is a saltwater fly. So the Charlie Boy hopper sort of came about from, tying Dave's hoppers when I was guiding, and I'd, come home at the end of the day and have to tie a dozen Dave's hoppers, which would take me 2 hours. And I was trying to come up with something that would be a little bit more durable, hold together a little better and float better. Especially in the long term. So I started playing with a foam-bodied hopper, and this was 20 years ago. Longer than that. I kind of base all this off how old my kids are. My oldest son is 25, so it's maybe even a little older than that. And I named the fly after him, but I was just trying to come up with a fly that didn't take so long to tie, but would do all the things that I needed it to do. And as it turns out, the fly is actually a pretty simple fly. I can tie one in 2 or 3 minutes these days. But it took me forever to come up with. And it's, just a simple foam body, double layered 2 millimeter foam body, super glued onto the hook and tied down, with a couple of rubber legs and a tuft of deer hair. And, in the years since, I've kind of beefed it up for, fishing out of the boat. Sometimes I'll put a macrame yarn underwing on it or tie it with 3 millimeter foam on a bigger hook. But, one of the things I probably see most consistently that people screw up on that fly is not pulling the foam all the way up past the bend of the hook so that the extended body portion of the body elevates up off and doesn't encroach on the hook bend. So that's what I'd say is probably the biggest thing I see on that fly, and having the right piece of deer hair for the wing makes a huge difference as well.
No, that's cool. Yeah, I'm looking at your site. And your site's clean. You got a nice black look. It's definitely cool. And you have the Charlie Boy hopper here. And yeah, you can just tell by looking at it. I mean, the deer hair, or I don't know, is that elk hair or deer hair?
That's deer, yeah.
Yeah, that's deer.
Yeah. And like I said, the right chunk just, works perfectly, and the wrong chunk doesn't work at all. So, it's fairly easy to figure out which one does work, but, finding it in the first place is a different story.
Totally. Yeah, it looks super clean. And when you clip that the little nub off on your deer hair, any tips to doing that? Do you pull it back, or how do you make it, does it matter if it's super even on that?
So I actually cut it ahead of time. So I cut it first and then tie it in.
There you go.
And that's how I get those ends so square and round. There's no way to trim those short of trimming them individually to get that little round head on there. So it's cut first, then tied down.
That's how you do it. Yeah, that's why it looks way better. And then just one more thing on that, the eye or whatever is that the dark? Is that just something that you a pin you just color it on?
It's just Sharpie marker, and I joke all the time that I put eyes on everything just because they cast better because they know where they're going. But, if it has an eye, I generally, on a bait fish pattern, absolutely always. But I mean, if it's a foam fly that I can put an eyeball on, I always do it. I say this, I every now and again in demos, I'll have forgotten my Sharpie marker and I'll tie a Charlie Boy and end up not putting the eyes on it. And I'll throw it in my box, and I've got 5 or 6 of them in my box with no eyes, and I will never fish them. Not as long as there's one with eyes next to it. It's just, they make me feel good. I'm confident in it, so I like the eyes on there. I'm sure it doesn't catch any more fish, but it's just something that makes me feel good about it, so I always put them on there.
Okay, cool. And on the segmented body, any tips there on doing that, or how do you make that look so clean?
Well, so that's just the thread, tied down, kind of move. It's advanced forward on the top of the hook, so you can't see where the thread crosses because it's under the wing. But cinching the foam down is something that I think a lot of people have some trouble with. And using the right thread, I'll use 3/0 monocord thread. It just binds in a little bit easier and it slides a bit, so it'll kind of crease that foam down nicely. If you're using 8/0 thread, it's generally too fine and will start to cut into the foam. And if you're using like 6/0 uni, which is about the same size as 3/0 Danville monocord, it's just a different consistency and texture to the thread. So the bulk builds up a lot faster. So there's only a couple of turns on each one of those segments. And again, that's where if 2 turns do it, don't make 7. And I see that a lot. I see 13 turns of thread at each one of those segments. Wow. It just fattens the fly up, and it's more thread than foam at that point.
Cool. And do you have I'm just looking at these flies. Obviously, you take some sweet shots. Any tips? I mean, how do you get these shots? Are you using a camera or your phone, or how are you doing it?
Oh, no, they're with the camera. I use a Nikon D70 and a 40 millimeter macro lens. And,
there you go.
I've got, since I started doing the book stuff, I've gotten, everybody thinks I'm a photographer. I can take really good fly pictures. That's about the end of it. I can't really take pictures of anything else, but with the right setup, again, I spent a ton of money on this photography stuff, and it works really well, but it is not by my own doing. I do like playing with it. I really like taking pictures of flies. But I wouldn't call myself a photographer compared to guys who really are. So I wouldn't pull them down to my level by any stretch, but it is something I enjoy.
Yeah, definitely. You're taking some great shots. Well, there's definitely plenty. I think we covered the 2 tips there. What about a couple of resources? Any other resources you had mentioned for somebody that are thinking about fly tying, books, magazines, resources, anything that's maybe not your own stuff that you might tell people to check out?
Well, I don't dig around on the internet a lot, but like I say, there's, David McPhail's got a bunch of good stuff on the internet. Kelly Gallup's got a lot of good stuff out there these days. Gunnar Brammer has got some really good streamer stuff. The guys at Fly Fish Food have got some really good videos. There's a lot of good stuff out there. And like I say, that's, those are ones that I've watched that are guys that know what they're doing. So that's sort of been vetted. And I'll be honest with you, I don't spend a ton of time, digging around on that stuff just because it kind of pollutes my thought process. So, it's not that it's not good for everybody. I just try to stay away from it myself, just so that I can kind of keep my mind pure and not end up inadvertently stealing something. But
I see.
There's certainly good stuff out there for sure.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, that's interesting because I think when I was chatting again, with Kelly, we were talking about that, and he was saying how, occasionally he would just watch a video from some random, somebody he didn't know, and he would pick up some tip. It was like, whoa, I've never thought about doing it that way. And it was a pretty, it's a pretty cool tip.
That's, I joke. I learned as much in my beginning fly tying classes as the students do because, they're fresh and clean at it. They don't have a preconceived notion of how it's done. So I've picked up lots of cool ways to do things from guys that have never tied before. So, never think you're too smart. That's for sure. There's always another way, whether it's better or not, but there's another way to do it for sure.
That's right. Cool, Charlie. Well, I think that's all. I mentioned at the start, we were talking about maybe digging into saltwater. We kind of ran out of time here, but, maybe down the line we can get you back on and chat about before I let you get out of here, any in the next 6 to 12 months, anything new you got coming with yourself for the shop or anything you want to let us know?
Oh, like I say, that streamer book, Tying Streamers, will be out somewhere around April 1st. So keep your eye out for that one. That's been what I've been working on the last few years. And, who knows what's coming with the shop. We've got, so much space and so many cool things, on the agenda. Keep an eye on that website for sure. There's always something new coming there. Perfect.
Well, I'll try. Yeah. Are you down in Denver, in downtown, or?
We're just north of Denver. So Arvada is just northwest of Denver, about 10 miles.
Oh, about 10 miles.
So just a suburb of, 10 miles north of downtown Denver. So really not far. So if you're in downtown Denver, you're only a 15-minute cab ride away.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'll maybe this next year I'll swing by if I can get back to Denver and say hi in person. That'd be fun to meet you. And I guess so. CharliesFlyboxInc.com if people have questions or want to connect with you.
Yep. And there's a contact form on there. You can hit me up there, and I generally, if I get the email, I'll answer it. So, just be patient. I will get to it.
All right. Perfect. Well, Charlie, hey, thanks again. I just wanted to thank you for coming on. We kind of were all over the place, I think, covering different topics, but I really wanted people, just if they hadn't heard about you, to check out your resource, because you got a lot of good stuff going. So I'll definitely send people your way and hopefully find a few of your videos out there.
Sounds awesome, Dave. I really appreciate you having me.
All right. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon.
You bet, man. Take care. So
there you go. If you want to find all links with all the show notes and links, go to wetflyswing.com/125. We're heading to Mexico this year. It's been a while for me, and there's just something about heading south to another country that gets you fired up. La Pescador is our destination. I'd love it if you could come down on the trip with us. Go to wetflyswing.com/Mexico for more information, or send me an email to dave@wetflyswing.com. I've got a new podcast that I've been loving lately. I love to occasionally share new podcasts that I've been enjoying as a self-admitted podcast addict. How I Built This with Guy Raz. It's great. It goes into the history of some of the most well-known companies you can imagine. I just listened to Starbucks, the founder of Starbucks, and it was pretty amazing. Pretty good show. So, this isn't a new show, but one I just started listening to. So that's good. If you have a favorite podcast, head over to wetflyswing.com/125 and leave a comment down at the bottom of the blog post. I'll know you're still listening as we're wrapping up here at the very end of this show. I want to say thanks again today for stopping by and check out the show. Hope you're having a great day, and hope to maybe see you online or on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com. And if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes.